my daughter came home from her secondary school. This was a year ago, 6 months ago. And she said to me, I did the Big Bang twice this week. So she's now in year 11, but she was in year 10. On Monday, I did it in religion. And on Wednesday, I did it in physics. And I asked her if she thought one department knew that the other was also touching on the Big Bang that week. She didn't think so. So I then asked, well, could you show me some work from each of the classrooms? And she did. She brought out her physics book, which had writing that stated information on the discovery of redshift and the development of the theory of the Big Bang. And it appeared much as the rest of the contents of the book. This is how it was discovered, and this is how it is. And her religion book had an informative photocopied handout with some information that was the same. But also this was complemented by a different type of information. So this is material about how different Christian and Muslim people held different beliefs about their origins, including different interpretations about narratives in their sacred texts, and then how they negotiated that with scientific theories and doctrines. So the religion book linked the authoritative mainstream understanding with sacred text authority that and obviously we opened up the space where religious people navigated and came to different conclusions. Suffice to say, from that anecdote, a curriculum is not just, or what goes on in a curriculum is not just the piling up of abstracted bits of content, because there is a pupil interacting with them, moving from one to another, a bit like our ship sailing between these different islands to be enriched by those knowledges. But it is, of course, in the pupil that these must then be negotiated.
We actually want to share some of the highlights of our research findings, and I just want to provide the overarching narrative here of what we did and what we found. So can you move on slide, Bob? Just to give you some background in sense of our research questions, we were looking to explore, first, John Paul, who's here today, did some work with videoing science religion encounters in the classroom, and then we went on to explore the experience of beginning teachers and their science religion encounters through focus groups and online survey. And these resources are really part of part 3. How can changes in teacher education programmes develop more confident and rich outcomes around science and religion encounters? And just to give you an idea of the background of what we did here, we partnered up with 6 different universities. We went out, Caroline and I, or during the pandemic, we went online doing 17 focus groups with 75 students. And we used those findings then from the focus groups to construct an online survey for beginning teachers, thinking in particular of beginning teachers as not just student teachers, but in the first 1 or 2 years of their career. So early career teachers as well as student teachers. Thanks, Bob. So just, it's really small and you won't be able to see all these graphs at all, but you can see who responded to that survey. Lots of primary student teachers, the blue is for the student teachers, but also a substantial number of science and RE teachers for us to build our data on. Okay, thanks, Bob. So one of the questions we asked about was the purpose of RE on the school curriculum. And we had noticed in the focus groups that the RE and the science teachers seem to have a kind of different language, if you like, for talking about the purpose of RE and the purpose of science. But we'll have to come back to that at a different point. If you look at this graph of findings, in the blue you can see the RE teachers, in the orange you can see the science teachers, and the grey at the back is primary teachers. We're not going to go into detail about these graphs today, but if you look at the blue first, then you can see that there's actually quite a range of responses from the RE teachers about what they think of the purpose of RE. They're not unified, really. And part of that, and then if you look at the science teachers behind, they seem to have quite a different understanding of what they think the purpose of RE is. In actual fact, they focus on providing values education. So providing perhaps a more moral or opinion-led view of what goes on in the RE classroom, whereas the RE teachers are kind of spread between whether they think it's about acquiring knowledge or flexibility of mind, or introducing spirituality, and so on. So we thought that was quite interesting, and you'll see later that the first couple of resources are built around this. By the way, this isn't just based on ranking for them to put what they preferred first. We did comparison graphs and gave points to like first, second and third place, and they come out as quite similar graphs, but there's more details on the website about going into detail about that. Okay, thanks, Bob. So we also went through the focus groups and came up with any examples that student teachers gave of science religion encounters in the classroom that they'd either taught or that they'd observed. We came up with this list, and then we asked that in the survey about examples that of science religion encounters that teachers had planned for on the left, and then also, because it's not always about the planning, is it, pupils ask awkward questions, so we also asked them about topics that pupils had raised as science religion encounters. For example, you're sitting there happily in your science lesson and a pupil says, but sir, in the Bible it says this. You know, that's the type of thing we're thinking of. And then not just what they'd experienced because they're very young or new to teaching, but also what they would aspire to in the future, what they would like to teach, which topics they would like to teach as science religion encounters in the future. Thanks, Bob. So this graph is those who have planned for this encounter. And you see the blue, the RE teachers at the front have probably planned for the most. You can see that's higher than the science teachers. And that's perhaps not surprising, with actually the grey in the background of the primary teachers dropping down quite a lot in terms of experience. But it's possible perhaps to identify some more RE leaning topics here, with things like death and creation stories that are being identified as things that the RE teachers have planned for. And if you look at the orange, kind of a few blocks in, you'll see climate change there is more science that they've been doing that. But there are interesting things as well. Look at evolution about 2/3 of the way along. About 60% of RE teachers and 60% of science teachers say they have planned for an encounter of science and religion in their classroom around the subject of evolution. And even climate change or the Big Bang, you've got more RE teachers doing it, perhaps, than you have science teachers. So this relates back to Bob's story and what's actually going on between these two departments. Okay, next one, please, Bob. We have interesting findings really about pupils raising questions, and Lynn Ravel, one of our colleagues, has actually taken the video pedagogy analysis and looked explicitly at that, and talked about one of the resources we're creating is about providing the opportunities for pupils to ask questions. This graph can be a little misleading because the one before was at 100% on the left, but this is at 50%, and I worry in a way that there are more opportunities for pupils to ask questions. But we do see pupils asking questions of both their science teachers and their RE teachers about these topics. Okay. And then in terms of aspirations, primary at the back come to the fore here. They really desire to do lots of this, but something perhaps is standing in their way a little bit, or acting as a barrier on what people would like to do. But there's also interesting topics that come up, you know, like gender identity. This is what I would aspire to be able to teach in my classroom, perhaps as a science religion encounter, or designer babies, and so on. So they're interesting findings when you get into them. Keep going, Bob. So we felt there was some barriers, or there might be some barriers, and we asked the participants specifically about this. You'll see, and you won't be surprised if you work in education, that limited curriculum time comes up as a big barrier there, and also on the right, the demands of national testing and assessments. But there's some interesting comparisons as well, because you've got the RE teachers at the front who are worried about the limits to their scientific knowledge, and you've got the science teachers who are worried about the limits to their knowledge of RE. And that's not surprising at all, but it does suggest that maybe these teachers might want to support one another in terms of the knowledge that they are bringing to the classroom to support these science religion encounters. We also asked them where they would go for support if they were coming to do different aspects of planning around this. And you'll see that online resources there, more than 70% of the students went to online resources, and more than 60% of the students going to YouTube videos or similar. So I think that's not surprising. Most of these teachers are, in their young 20s, and they're going straight to the internet. What I think is quite interesting is that university tutors is there at about 50%, and teacher education mentors in school is just over 50%. So half of the and they were allowed to respond to more than one of these, but half of the early career teachers and student teachers are not going to university tutors and not going to mentors for support in how to teach some quite complex and sensitive stuff, which is, I think, quite interesting, really, and partly maybe part of the assessment culture that they don't want to be seen to have a deficit of knowledge in this area, and so therefore they'd rather go and ask Google than ask for support from those who are there to support them. We're quite interested in this graph. So we looked at some of the literature around the relationship between science and religion more broadly than in education. And there was various typologies out there which we borrowed from in creating this as a graph. So we put 5 words out there, and here they are nicely alphabetical rather than any sense of progress through them. And we asked the secondary teachers what was the relationship between the science and the RE departments, and we asked the primary teachers more what they felt was the relationship between the subjects, because obviously they didn't have different departments as much. And you'll see that there was hardly any example of conflict between the two, right? Especially if we're focusing here on secondary today. Though there are a few examples of collaboration and dialogue, and this is supported in the qualitative data from the focus groups, and it might include things like I always go and check with the science teacher when I'm teaching the Big Bang so that I can make sure I get the facts right, or in my department they bring the science teacher into the RE classroom when they're doing this aspect of it so that we get it, or we choose to plan those things on the curriculum at the same time, and we think that those are examples of dialogue and collaboration. But of course, by far the biggest responses were about independence, and we don't really see independence here as a positive descriptor. It's not an example of conflict, but we've seen that these topics are being taught, and they're important topics, things like climate change and so on, in both subjects, and yet there's complete independence between how the departments are approaching those, and that leaves the pupil to have to go backwards and forwards between the subjects to try and work out what's going on and how they're understanding it.